The rain poured mercilessly that night, blurring the city lights into a chaotic mess of colors. Ayaan stood by the window of his luxury apartment, staring at his phone, his thumb hovering over Maya's name. He shouldn't call her. Not after what had happened. Not after what he had done. His heart pounded as he recalled the night they met. With her sharp wit and a laugh that felt like a melody he had been searching for his entire life. She wasn't just another woman in his life. She was the woman. But love had never been kind to him, and he had never been kind to love. The problem wasn't just that Ayaan was engaged. The problem was that his Rhea was Maya's older sister. He let out a breath and set his phone down, running a hand through his hair. He needed to stop this. He needed to forget her. But how could he, when every moment without her felt like suffocation? Their affair hadn't been planned. It had started with stolen glances across crowded rooms, then playful teasing that lingered just a little too long. And then, one night, when Rhea had left Maya and Ayaan alone to pick up a last-minute errand, the air between them had cracked open like a fault line. The way she had looked at him that night, wide-eyed, breathless, uncertain, had destroyed whatever resolve he had left. "This is wrong," she had whispered, her lips just inches from his. "Then tell me to stop," he had said. She hadn't, and neither had he. Now, months later, it was no longer a question of right or wrong. It was an addiction. A sharp knock on the door jolted him back to the present. His pulse quickened. He didn't need to ask who it was. He already knew. He opened the door, and there she stood, soaked from the rain, mascara smudged beneath her eyes, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if trying to hold her own pieces together. "Ayaan," Maya whispered. He didn't speak. He couldn't. She pushed past him, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor as she made her way inside. The room smelled like expensive cologne and unfinished whiskey, the air heavy with tension. "I told myself I wouldn't come here," she said, voice trembling. "I told myself I'd be strong." Ayaan closed the door, watching her carefully. "Then why are you here?" She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Because I'm weak." He took a slow step toward her. "We both are." Silence stretched between them, thick and unbearable. Maya turned to him, eyes glistening. "She showed me her wedding dress today." His stomach clenched. "Maya." "She asked me to help her pick one. She was so happy, Ayaan. She kept twirling in front of the mirror, asking me if she looked beautiful." His jaw tightened. He could already tell where this was going. "She does look beautiful," Maya continued, "and the entire time, all I could think about was the fact that I kissed her last night." Ayaan inhaled sharply. "Maya, stop." "No," she said, stepping closer, voice breaking. "Don't you get it? I can't stop. I love her, Ayaan. She's my sister." He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. "And you think I don't feel guilty?" Her hands trembled at her sides. "Then, why does it still feel impossible to walk away?" Because it was. Because, despite everything, he couldn't breathe without her. Because the moment he had tasted her lips, felt her body pressed against his, he had known he was never going to love anyone else the way he loved Maya. His fingers twitched at his sides, aching to reach for her, to pull her in and kiss away the torment in her eyes. But she stepped back before he could. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "We have to end this before it destroys everything." Ayaan exhaled sharply, dragging a hand over his face. He had heard these words before. Every time she left, she promised herself she wouldn't return. And yet, she always did, just like he always let her. "We can't keep pretending," she continued, voice barely above a whisper. "Rhea loves you." "I don't love her," he said without hesitation. Maya flinched as if hearing the truth made it worse. "Then why are you marrying her?" Ayaan looked away. He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, but he didn't have the courage to say it aloud. because it was expected, because their families were intertwined, because Rhea had been in his life for years, and leaving her would mean ripping apart everything they had built, because choosing Maya meant becoming the villain in everyone's story. But the worst part, he had never felt more like himself than when he was with her. Maya took a shaky breath. "Tell me you love me." Ayaan's gaze snapped back to hers, his heart stuttering. She stepped forward, inches away now. "Say it, Ayaan. If you love me, if this isn't just some sick, twisted mistakes." His throat felt tight. "You know I do." "Then prove it," she whispered. He swallowed hard. "How?" She met his eyes, and he already knew what she was going to say before she said it. "Leave her." The words settled between them, heavier than anything she had ever said before. Ayaan stared at her, his mind racing. Could he do it? Could he really walk away from Rhea, from their families, from everything, for this woman, for the only woman who had ever truly owned his heart? Seconds passed. Maya's eyes filled with disappointment. She nodded slowly, as if she had already known the answer. "Goodbye, Ayaan." And this time, when she walked away, she didn't look back. Chapter 2. The Taste of Sin. Maya pressed her forehead against the cool surface of her car's steering wheel. Eyes shut tight, she could still feel Ayaan's presence. The way his voice had trembled when she had told him to leave Rhea. She had meant it this time. She had to. But if that were true, why was she sitting outside his apartment an hour later? Hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. Her phone buzzed in her lap. She already knew who it was. "Ayaan, are you still outside?" Maya let out a breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She should drive away. She should forget him. But her fingers moved on their own. "Maya, yes." A few seconds passed before her screen lit up again. "Ayaan, come upstairs." She hesitated. Then, as if possessed, she opened her car door and stepped out. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick, reflecting the city lights like shards of broken glass. With every step toward his building, guilt twisted in her stomach. This was wrong, but it was also inevitable. By the time she reached his door, her pulse was racing. Before she could even knock, the door swung open. Ayaan stood there, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his hair slightly disheveled like he had been running his hands through it in frustration. His eyes locked onto hers, dark and unreadable. Neither of them spoke. Then, suddenly, Ayaan reached out, gripping her wrist and pulling her inside. The door shut behind them with a quiet thud. "Maya," he breathed, as if just saying her name hurt. She should speak. She should tell him this was a mistake. But the words died in her throat as his fingers brushed against her cheek, trailing down to her jaw. "This is wrong," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He nodded. "I know." But neither of them moved away. Ayaan cupped her face, his thumb tracing slow, deliberate circles against her skin. "Tell me to stop." Maya swallowed, trying to find the strength to do it. But she couldn't. Instead, she closed the distance between them, her lips crashing into his. The kiss was desperate, hungry, fueled by every moment they had spent pretending they could resist this. Ayaan's hands roamed her body like he was memorizing her all over again, pulling her impossibly closer. Maya felt herself unraveling. His touch, his scent, the way he groaned against her lips, it was all too much. She had spent months trying to suppress this, to convince herself that she could move on. But she couldn't. She never could. Ayaan backed her against the wall, his hands sliding down to her waist, gripping her like he was afraid she would disappear. "We shouldn't be doing this," she gasped between kisses. Ayaan pulled back slightly, resting his forehead against hers. His breath was warm, uneven. "Then why does it feel like the only thing that makes sense?" Maya closed her eyes. "Because we're selfish." He exhaled sharply, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. Maybe. A beat of silence passed. Then, softly, he asked, "Would you have married me if we had met first?" The question sent a jolt through her. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. He looked vulnerable in a way she had never seen before, like a man desperate for an answer that could rewrite the past. "Yes," she admitted, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. Ayaan let out a shaky breath. Maya ran her fingers through his hair, whispering, "Would you have chosen me?" Without hesitation, he said, "I would have never looked at anyone else." Her chest ached. It was cruel, wasn't it? To realize that in another life, they could have had everything, but in this one, they were nothing more than a beautiful mistake. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, yanking her back to reality. She pulled away, fumbling to take it out. Her stomach dropped when she saw the name on the screen. Rhea. Maya's hands trembled as she answered. "Hello." Rhea's voice was laced with excitement. "Where are you?" Maya swallowed. Just out." "Come home," Rhea said, oblivious to the guilt crushing Maya's chest. "I have something to tell you." Maya hesitated. "What is it?" Rhea laughed softly. "I'll tell you when you get here." Maya forced a smile. "Okay, I'll be there soon." As she ended the call, she turned to Ayaan, who was watching her carefully. She shook her head. "I need to go." His jaw tightened. "She knows, doesn't she?" Maya sighed. "No, but she will eventually." Ayaan exhaled heavily, stepping back. "I don't want to lose you." "You already have," she whispered, stepping past him. But as she reached for the door, Ayaan's fingers wrapped around her wrist. "Maya," he said softly, "don't go." Her heart clenched. She turned back, looking into the eyes of the man who had ruined her, who had owned her in ways she couldn't escape, but she couldn't stay. She gently pulled away, whispering, "Goodbye, Ayaan." And this time, she meant it. Chapter 3. Shattered Vows. The wedding hall was bathed in golden light, the chandeliers casting a warm glow over the sea of elegantly dressed guests. Flowers draped over every surface, their delicate fragrance weaving through the air like a silent promise of love and forever. The music played softly in the background, a gentle melody that should have felt magical. Yet to Maya, it sounded like a funeral march. She stood at the side of the room, hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Her breath came in shallow waves, her entire body tense as she watched her sister glide across the hall in a breathtaking white gown. Rhea looked radiant, happy, excited, innocent. Maya felt sick. She had promised herself she wouldn't come. She had planned to run, to leave the city before she had to watch the man she loved marry her sister. But Rhea had begged her to be here. "You're my lucky charm, Maya," Rhea had said with a bright smile that cut through Maya like a blade. "I need you by my side." And so she had come, wearing the guilt like an iron cage around her heart. Across the hall, Ayaan stood near the altar, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. He looked calm, composed, but Maya knew better. She could see it in the way his fingers twitched at his sides, in the way his jaw remained clenched. He hadn't spoken to her since that night, not since she had walked out of his apartment, leaving behind everything they had built and stolen, moments and whispered confessions. She told herself it was for the best. Then why did it feel like she was dying? A soft hand touched her arm, pulling her out of her thoughts. "You okay?" Maya turned to see Rhea, her eyes filled with warmth, oblivious to the storm raging inside Maya's chest. Maya's throat tightened. "You look beautiful." Rhea's smile widened. "You think so?" She twirled slightly, the lace of her gown flowing around her like something out of a dream. "I feel like a princess." Maya forced a nod. "You are," Rhea sighed, her expression softening. "I can't believe this is happening. I'm so nervous." Maya swallowed the lump in her throat. "Why?" Rhea let out a small, anxious laugh. "Because I love him, and I just want everything to be perfect." Maya felt her stomach twist. Rhea loved him. She loved a man who had spent months tangled in Maya's arms, whispering promises meant for her and her alone. Maya wanted to scream, to shake her, to confess everything. Instead, she smiled. "It will be perfect." Rhea beamed, squeezing her hand. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Maya felt like she was suffocating. The ceremony began. Rhea walked down the aisle, her face glowing with happiness. Every step she took felt like another nail in Maya's coffin. She wanted to look away, to close her eyes and pretend none of this was real. But Ayaan was staring at her, not at Rhea, not at the officiant, at her. His eyes burned into her like a silent plea, a desperate question that neither of them could answer. As the officiant began speaking, Maya felt her entire body tremble. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Ayaan and Rhea. In the sacred bond of marriage." Maya gripped the edge of her dress, her nails digging into her skin. She couldn't breathe. Marriage is a promise, a commitment to love, honor, and cherish one another through all of life's trials. Ayaan's fingers curled into fists at his sides. "If anyone here has any reason why these two should not be joined in matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." Silence, heavy, deafening silence. Maya's heart pounded. Say something, but her lips wouldn't move. And then Ayaan did the unthinkable. "I can't do this." Gasps erupted through the hall. Rhea stiffened beside him, her head snapping toward him in confusion. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ayaan's breathing was uneven. His hands trembled at his sides. "I can't marry you." The room fell into chaos. People murmured, their voices rising in confusion and shock. Rhea's parents stood up, eyes wide with disbelief. Rhea's face crumbled. "Ayaan, what are you saying?" Ayaan turned his gaze to Maya. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. "No," she whispered, shaking her head slightly. "Don't do this. Not like this." But it was too late. Ayaan took a deep breath, his voice steady but filled with pain. "I love someone else." Silence. Horrible, unbearable silence. And then Rhea followed his gaze. Her eyes landed on Maya. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the realization struck. Maya saw it in the way her sister's expression shifted from confusion to horror, to betrayal so deep it left Maya breathless. "No," Rhea said, almost like a broken prayer. She turned to Ayaan, desperate. "You don't mean that." Ayaan didn't move. Rhea's entire body shook. "You don't mean that." Maya felt like she was drowning. "Rhea," she began, but the words died on her tongue as Rhea turned to her with tears brimming in her eyes. "It's you," Rhea whispered. "It's been you all along." Maya opened her mouth to speak, to fix this, but no words came. The betrayal on Rhea's face was like a knife to the chest. Tears spilled down her sister's cheeks as she let out a small, broken laugh. You were supposed to be my best friend." Maya S's own vision blurred. "Rhea, But Rhea had already turned away. She reached up, trembling fingers pulling the engagement ring off her hand. And then, with a final, devastating look at Ayaan, she threw it at his chest. "Go to hell," she whispered. And with that, Rhea walked away. Maya stood frozen, the weight of everything crashing down around her. The whispers, the judgmental stares, the humiliation, none of it mattered. All that mattered was that she had destroyed the one person she had sworn to protect. Ayaan reached for her, his fingers grazing her arm. "Maya," she jerked away from him. The reality of what they had done, hitting her like a tidal wave. Tears streamed down her face. "What have we done?" Ayaan's jaw tightened. "We told the truth." Maya let out a bitter laugh. "No, Ayaan, we destroyed her." She wiped at her face, turning away before she could completely shatter. "I can't do this," she choked out. "Not anymore." Ayaan stiffened. "Maya, please." But she was already walking away, following the same path Rhea had taken. Because no matter how much she loved him, some sins could never be forgiven. And this was unforgivable. Chapter 4. The Weight of Guilt. Maya had spent the last 4 days locked inside her apartment. Her phone had been ringing non-stop calls from her parents, from mutual friends, from people who had no business knowing what had happened. She had ignored every single one, but the only calls that truly terrified her were the ones from Rhea, or rather, the ones that never came. Rhea hadn't called, she hadn't texted, she hadn't come banging on Maya's door demanding an explanation. That silence was worse than screaming. Maya sat curled up on her couch, a half-empty glass of wine in her hands. She had barely eaten, barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Rhea's face, her shock, her betrayal, her heartbreak. The headlines hadn't helped. Ayaan Kana calls off wedding at the altar secret. Affair with bride's sister exposed. Scandal in high society. Betrayal, heartbreak, and the ultimate family feud. Everywhere she turned, there was another article, another speculation, another reminder of the destruction she and Ayaan had caused. And Ayaan, he had tried to call. She had ignored him too. She wasn't ready to face him. She wasn't sure she ever would be. The knock on her door startled her. Her heart lurched as she stared at the door. Breath caught in her throat. She already knew who it was. For the first time in days, she moved slowly, hesitantly setting down her glass and standing up. When she opened the door, she wasn't surprised to see him. Ayaan stood there, looking as wrecked as she felt. His eyes were bloodshot, dark circles under them. He looked like he hadn't slept, like he had been carrying the same unbearable weight she had. "Maya," he breathed. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself. "You shouldn't be here. I had to see you." She let out a bitter laugh. "Why? Haven't we done enough damage?" Ayaan flinched, but he didn't back down. "We need to talk." Maya crossed her arms. "There's nothing left to say." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Don't do that. Don't pretend like this didn't mean anything to you." Her throat tightened. It shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. Silence stretched between them. Ayaan took a step forward, lowering his voice. "I love you, Maya." Maya's heart clenched. She had waited so long to hear those words. She had dreamed of them, longed for them in ways she could never admit. But now they felt hollow. She shook her head. "Love isn't supposed to destroy lives, Ayaan." His jaw tightened. "What do you want me to do? Pretend that I don't feel this way? Pretend that I don't wake up every morning thinking about you?" She looked away. "It doesn't matter anymore." He reached for her hand, fingers brushing against hers. "Of course it matters." She pulled away, stepping back. "Rhea hasn't called me." Ayaan stilled. "She hasn't called," Maya repeated, her voice cracking. "Not once. Do you know what that means?" Ayaan swallowed hard. "She's angry. She hates me." Maya pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the ache deep inside. "I ruined her life. I ruined everything. And for what?" Ayaan didn't answer. Maya forced herself to meet his gaze. "If you could go back, would you still do it? Would you still walk away from her, knowing how much we've destroyed?" Ayaan hesitated. That hesitation was all she needed. Maya let out a small, broken laugh. "You're not even sure, are you?" Ayaan ran a hand over his face, exhaling heavily. "I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me that this was worth it," she whispered. "I want you to tell me that we didn't ruin Rhea's life for nothing." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Maya felt tears burn her eyes. She turned away. "You should go." Ayaan stiffened. "Maya, please." Her voice wavered, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt like she might fall apart. She heard him exhale sharply, heard the hesitation in his steps. But finally, after a long, painful moment, he walked away. The door closed behind him with a quiet finality. And just like that, she was alone again. 3 weeks passed, 3 weeks of silence. Maya had gone back to work, forcing herself into a routine, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her wherever she went. She hadn't spoken to Ayaan. She hadn't spoken to Rhea. And then, one afternoon, Rhea showed up at her door. Maya's breath caught as she stared at her sister, standing there like a ghost from another life. Rhea looked different. Her eyes were duller, her face thinner. She had always been effortlessly beautiful, but now she looked tired. Maya opened her mouth, but Rhea spoke first. "I need to know," she said, her voice quiet, steady. Was it love? Or was it just lust? Maya felt like she had been punched in the stomach. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to hold Rhea's gaze. It wasn't just lust. Rhea's jaw clenched. Then it would have been better if it was. Maya felt tears sting her eyes. "Rhea, I never meant to." "Don't." Rhea held up a hand. "Don't say you didn't mean to hurt me, because you did. You knew what you were doing every time you looked at him, every time you touched him, every time you chose him." Maya's shoulders shook. "I never wanted to betray you, but you did." Rhea let out a shaky breath. "And you can't take it back." Maya felt like she was drowning. "I don't know how to fix this." Rhea stared at her for a long moment. Then finally she whispered, "You can't." The words settled over them like a death sentence. Maya felt something inside her break. Rhea straightened, taking a deep breath. "I'm leaving." Maya's heart stopped. "What?" "I can't be here anymore. I can't be around you, around him." Rhea's voice wavered. "I need to start over." Maya felt panic rise in her chest. "Rhea, please." Rhea's expression remained unreadable. "I don't hate you, Maya." Maya blinked, stunned. "But I don't forgive you either," Rhea continued, her voice quiet but firm. "And I don't think I ever will." The finality in her words shattered whatever was left of Maya's heart. She wanted to beg, to cry, to throw herself at Rhea's feet and plead for another chance. But she had lost that right. Rhea turned to leave. Maya watched her go, watched her sister walk away from her just like she had walked away from Ayaan. And for the first time she understood. Some love stories weren't meant to have happy endings. Some choices could never be undone. And some betrayals left wounds that time would never heal.